Today, we're diving into a crisis that's often hidden in plain sight, concealed by the very landscape itself. We're talking about the unique and honestly desperate struggle of domestic violence survivors in the huge rural areas of Texas.
And that's the question that gets right to the heart of it, isn't it? For so many people, leaving isn't just one single choice. It's more like a journey across a brutal obstacle course, where every single hurdle is higher and farther apart than you can possibly imagine.
And that brings us right here. Because in rural Texas, the single biggest barrier to safety, it isn't always a person or a locked door. It's the sheer unforgiving distance. Geography itself can feel like the abuser.
Just look at this number, 100 plus miles. For most of us, that's a road trip we plan for. But for a survivor in rural Texas, that number can be the minimum distance they have to travel just to find a shelter, a safe bed for one single night.
To really put that into perspective, imagine you're fleeing a dangerous, life-threatening situation. And then, on top of all that, you have to drive from Dallas all the way down to Waco. Now, try to imagine doing it with no car, no money, and maybe with your kids right there with you. That's the staggering reality we're talking about.
So what is it that creates this impossible situation? Let's break down what we can call the four Great Walls, these specific compounding barriers that keep rural survivors trapped.
I mean, just look at this slide. It lays out two completely different worlds. An urban survivor, they might have access to buses, several shelters, a police station just a few minutes away. But a rural survivor, they have none of that. They're looking at hours, literal hours to get to safety, with often no way to even get there, and just a few law enforcement officers covering a massive, massive area.
So here they are, these four walls we're going to dig into. We've already touched on the insane distances, but let's look at the others. You've got delayed police response, a complete lack of transportation, and the incredibly powerful force of cultural stigma. Each one is a huge barrier on its own, but when you put them all together, they can feel absolutely insurmountable.
And let's be really clear about what we mean by police delays. This isn't about officers not trying hard enough. No way. This is about a handful of sheriff's deputies being responsible for an area the size of a small state. So when you call 911 for help, that help might be 30, 40, even 60 minutes away. In a life or death situation, that is an eternity.
And then you have this other barrier, the cultural wall. Look, in a small town, everybody knows everybody. And that can be a wonderful thing, a great source of support. But it can also be twisted into a tool of control. The fear of gossip, of being judged, of people not believing you. It creates this intense pressure to just stay silent.
So when you add all of this up, it leads to a truly devastating human cost. These barriers, they aren't just abstract problems on a slide. They have a very real, very painful impact on a survivor who is completely and utterly isolated.
And this right here is the brutal consequence. After trying to leave and failing, with no shelter to go to and zero resources to fall back on, many survivors feel like they have only one option left: to go back. They return to the very danger they just tried to escape, and often the violence gets even worse.
And that impact, it just ripples outward. Children growing up in these homes, they witness violence as a normal part of life, which can create a terrible cycle of trauma. And here's a crucial, terrifying fact. We know the single most dangerous time for a survivor is when they try to leave. In an isolated rural area, that risk is amplified dramatically.
And this is so important, this is not a hopeless story. The very same challenges that define this problem are now inspiring some incredibly creative and targeted solutions. People are literally forging new ways to bring help right to where it's needed the most.
And this is where the strategy totally shifts. The core idea behind all these new solutions is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. If survivors can't get to the help, well then the help has to find a way to get to the survivors.
So this is the new toolkit for rural support. And what's brilliant is that each of these steps is designed to knock down one of those walls we talked about. Mobile advocacy brings counselors right to the survivor. Telehealth gets around the need for travel. Housing vouchers create local safe spots. And resource sharing helps every single dollar go further.
Let's just talk about mobile advocacy for a second, because it's a complete game changer. Instead of a survivor having to figure out how to get to an office 100 miles away, a trained advocate gets in a car and drives to meet them. They meet in a safe, discreet place in their own community, like a library, a church, maybe even a coffee shop. It's revolutionary.
And that really gets to the most crucial point in all of this. You cannot just take urban solutions, slap them on rural problems, and expect them to work.
It just doesn't. The unique challenges of distance, of isolation, of small-town culture, they all require a fundamentally different strategy, one that's built from the ground up specifically for rural communities.
So, what's the path forward? What's really needed? Well, it boils down to these three things. Targeted funding that's specifically set aside for rural programs, not just treated as an afterthought. A massive expansion of those mobile services we were just talking about, and community awareness campaigns to really start breaking down that cultural wall of silence.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big question to think about. This isn't just a problem for law enforcement or for social workers to solve. When an entire community is isolated both by geography and by culture, who is really responsible for building that bridge to safety? It's a question for all of us.